Well, it's hard to believe, but you are on Essay 5, and you've been through the process of selecting your articles, you've submitted an outline, and you have summarized the two required database articles. And you need to check Blackboard for my feedback on that. But also, as you are shifting to the drafting part, which includes citing your sources, we need to stop and just make sure that you understand what you need to do. Now, some of you, especially I know if you took me for one-on-one, you have been through research paper and instruction on citation, but doing one with literature, it can be, it's a little, another dimension to it. It's a little trickier. And if you've never done one at all, then you need to really carefully look at the examples. You need to look at all the videos carefully, and make sure you are following the instructions exactly. Okay, so we're doing what would be considered an exploratory research essay because you are exploring them to find out more information about stories that we have already studied. And the key thing that I'm looking for is that you are building on the knowledge that you gained from a study. We've already learned some of the basic things. We've done our own literature analysis. We've had focus on times on theme or on conflict or character. Identifying with a character. Now we're getting outside of what we've learned how to do and expanding that. We're expanding that by seeing what literature scholars who devote their profession, their life to studying these works or these authors and the insight that they can give us because they've had more time and more training, right? And we need to make sure we are getting scholars and experts, and that's why I've required you to use the library databases. Now they're AVL, which means, as we had a little issue with our getting into the databases on the website the other week, you can get into them through the Alabama Virtual Library. But either way, these are paid for by tax dollars for the AVL and tuition dollars, because we do have special ones in the Lawson State website that you can't get from the AVL. And these would not be, they're not free. You've paid for them these other means, and the stuff out there is not free out on the web. Internet sources are generally, if they're like Wikipedia, SparkNotes, they're just not generally accepted sources. Wikipedia, you can't verify the expertise of the authorship. SparkNotes is kind of high school level. This is a college paper, and so we expect college level scholarly, academic, knowledgeable sources. Okay, and of course I hope that this would already been checked off, that you're writing about a topic or story you didn't already write about for a previous essay, because that will be caught by SafeAssign. It'll catch any matching content, and then you're going to be in really big trouble. So make sure you've made that shift if that was needed. You can use additional sources as long as they are scholarly, that they've been published in a scholarly or academic journal, that kind of thing. You can get them. You can get a third or fourth if you need it to get to your length. Okay, but basically you should be able to handle this with just the two. You need to have a focus that unifies your paper. So it could be theme, it could be character analysis, symbols, any of those things. Those are just examples. Of course, it depends on what you actually find. It's kind of wide open out on, in the databases what scholars are going to focus on, that they think will take us beyond what is pretty obvious on our own study. There are examples in your book, Chapter 6, that's part of your reading assignment, where you can see a research-supported essay. There's explanation of things. There's additional information on documenting and citing sources, Chapter 7. Now, that's super important, and I'll look at an example with you, because if you don't document and cite your sources, then you've plagiarized. But there is also accuracy in citation. You've got to do it a particular way, and that's part of college protocol. It's going to be part of your professional protocol. No, it won't be in your profession to use MLA, but there will be a set protocol that you will have to follow on your job, and so you just kind of have to get used to that. You can't just do it whatever seems good to you. We've already discussed our prompts. You're at the point where you have done that. Matter of fact, you have done number 1, number 2, number 3, and now we're coming up to number 4. And that first draft has to have the in-text parenthetical citations and a works cited page, because I can't tell if you're doing your citations right without it. So if you don't have that, you will not get a passing grade. And our drafts are always 500 words. Now that's for the words in the essay. The works cited page It was a separate, it's part of it, but it's not part of the essay, like the 5 paragraphs, okay? So that doesn't count in the 500 words. It doesn't count in the 750 to 1,000 words either. So when you get to this, you might have 1,050 or a 750 word, draft, and then you add the works cited. That could be another 100 or 130, because you're going to end up with 3 citations, by the way. We'll come back to that. I've looked at your outlines. You need to kind of look at my feedback, but to make sure your introduction is doing what it's supposed to, okay? It does need an engaging lead-in that leads us to the focus of your paper. You do need to identify the short story and the author that you selected for this focus, a little bit of background, but not a summary of the story. I already know the story. I don't need to be told the story. We don't generally write that way in college. It's not a book report. Background, time period of the story, the publication date, and then anything that would be relevant, background context that we need to know before we understand the focus of your paper. Okay? Now remember, we all read the story, but you just need to make sure we're on the same page with you. And then it needs to end with a thesis that states the specific research focus of the essay and previews the arrangement, basically the main points. And if it is focused on the articles, then as an exploratory research paper, you can include those titles there, that information. The body paragraphs do, however, need to begin with a clear topic sentence stating the focus of the paragraph, followed by explanation, and supported by primarily database articles. Now again, it depends on your outline option. If you took the one where you take the summary article approach, then you have that 3rd paragraph, which should be the first one, that highlights what you found on your own analysis on that story on a related focus. Like if your articles are focusing on symbolism, then what you were able to see with symbolism, and you would need to use the text, the story, as your quoted and supported material. Now, the emphasis at this point is to be paraphrased or summarized, okay? That's why you did the article summaries. However, a lot of the summaries I read are very, very vague and overviewed, and what you need to do is add some specifics. Now, that can be a quote, and I even put that in some feedback, quote the really good stuff, paraphrase the rest, but the key ideas that are unique to that article are what you did this research for. Okay, so insert that in along the way. Now I'm saying limiting the direct quoting to 1 quotation per paragraph, no longer than 2 lines. I will allow, as you'll see in the sample I give you, that if you are very selective in your quotation and you integrate it well into your paraphrasing and summarizing, you can have more than just 1 quotation. You might have 2 short ones, okay? But the thing we're trying to do is not have just a copy-paste paper. That's not really a research paper the way that you're supposed to present it. You have to be very selective about what you quote word for word. The rest of it has to be paraphrased or summarized, but you still let us know that you always are attributing. It doesn't matter if you borrowed that information from that article, it has to be very clear that it came from that source and what page number it came from, whether you summarized it, paraphrased it, or directly quoted it. The thing that you do to help remind us of the borrowed information is that thing called attribution. It's where you identify the source by name. You have to put it at least here, but when you tell us a little bit more about it in the sentence, that's another way. According to literary scholar Hannah McKnight, the story, blah, 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 and you found that on page 2. And then you say something else like, she also notes that, or the article indicates that, something that reminds us that you got this from an outside source, and it's separate from the things that you observed on your own. Then your conclusion wraps up a reflective insight that's gained from this research that you did, and any thoughts relevant to the essay's focus. You should have learned something new, right? And that should have given you some insight. Here's the citations. You have a works cited page, and in the past we've only had 1 citation because we had 1 story, except for the comparison contrast. That's right, we had 2 because we had 2 stories. Now we have 1 story and 2 database articles. So that's a total of 3, and they need to be alphabetized. Let's take a look at a sample. Okay, this is written on a story that we did not study this time, so it makes a great example because no one is working on this. So it's had a little catchy title called Ghost Story, and because that's the emphasis of the articles. All right, I've highlighted some things. First of all, we see that it tells us what story, gives us that background information. I wouldn't call it a super engaging lead-in, but it does the job of giving us just the background and just an overview of the story. It tells about when it was first published and that he approached it in a very unusual manner, and it is an unusual story. And they start shifting the focus to the format being what's called non-linear. And it might be helpful to explain that, but and then that it's also seen as a ghost story because of this mythical narrator. So it's on point of view, narrating. Maybe he's referring that or indicating that the narrator is a ghost. Here's the thesis. Through the use of non-linear structure, that's a plot arrangement, Faulkner uses a mythical narrator without a true identification to tell the ghost story of Emily by shifting from first person to third person. All right, so that unifies the focus of this, and the articles were both about the point of view, which is the narrator. Okay, and adds that idea of being a ghost. So that's a good intro with a good thesis. Okay, here's our first paragraph. Now this one took not the summary option. This took the 3 points with support. Now this first point is primarily supported by an article written by Michael Burdock. They did incorporate a little bit of textual support, but I'm really not looking for that here. The absence of gender is the first aspect regarding the mythical narrator. So the idea of is it a he or a she? So that's explained here, right? There's much debate over whether or not the narrator is male or female. However, there are cases where both could be true, and then they go into what the article said. So this is your sort of traditional take a point, support it with your own thoughts, and support those with what you found in the article. So that's one approach there. And it's the harder probably of the two, but you see that you see the attribution, Burdick concludes, Burdick also proves, so makes it real clear whose ideas are whose. One thing that makes the story even more mysterious is the fact that Faulkner labels his story ghost story. Now, how do we know that? Because Thomas Klein wrote an article that said he did. And there's the attribution in blue, and you see that there is part paraphrasing and selective quoting and a page number. Referring to page numbers. When we use our databases, some of them have page numbers good and some don't. If you used the Yale Literature Resource Center, it could be that it was HTML, and you just, when you print it out, there aren't any page numbers. In that case, use the page number of your printout. If you didn't print it out, I will accept the absence of a page number if there isn't one. If it's a short article, you should say the paragraph number. If you got it off of like Academic Search Premier, they usually have a PDF option, and sometimes they have it in Gale documents. The PDF will have the real page number as it was in print originally, and that is what we would always want, and that's preferable. But like I said, even through a database, sometimes they give you an HTML and it doesn't have one. So, but make sure it's really clear, you know, where it begins and where it ends, which is super easy if you have an author and you have a page number. And then this leads on to some other discussion. You can see this one was a little over 1,000 words, but actually that includes the works cited, so it's not actually 1,000 words for the essay. Last point, Faulkner's unique way of telling the story of A Rose for Emily through nonlinear structure and his shift of point of view really leaves the reader with many questions, and this was emphasized by the Klein article. They could have used both, but this, you know, that's how it laid out. And then there's a nice lengthy conclusion here where they kind of reflect on what they got from that information, what they thought about it. I believe they've taken the context to a whole new, you know, extreme. I completely agree. They make sense. It's interesting to see. It helps me understand, you know, it better, kind of thing. And here's your works cited page. All right, let me just show you this right here. See that? 90, that's 90 words. So that means this word count is actually just a hair over 1,000 words. So remember, this part does not count in the word count. But it's formatted correctly. Works cited is the title. It's centered. Then your citations are here on the left margin. Now that's just blown up because of the notations. Okay, and we're about out of time, but they're hanging indented in double space like you should know how to do. But notice that you've got the story citation, you have the articles, and the way they're ordered is according to this word right here, okay, which is the words that show up in the paper to let me know which source it came from, and it's alphabetized. Burdock, Faulkner Klein. That's the rule. You alphabetize it according to that author's last name. And then you notice if I say your citation was incomplete, because if it came from the database, it's going to say that. It's going to say where it originally was published, right, like Explicator or the Studies in English, and it's going to have which database you found it in. All right, so I will make that draft available for you to look at, but follow the instructions that you were given.